Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Sitting in for Pinky Webb, I'm Menchu Macapagal. Today on the program, more nations rally behind the Philippines after its laser dispute with China near the Ayungin Shoal. China says laser pointing incident was only for navigation safety in disputed waters. Former Philippines Ambassador to the United States, Cuisia Jr., joins us on the show. And later, the Sugar Regulatory Administration awaits the go signal to import 440,000 metric tons of refined sugar. Sugar Regulatory Administration Board member Pablo Luis Azcona tells us more. China denies its vessel beamed laser at the crew of Philippine ship BRP Malapascua in the recent incident that appears to escalate tensions in the West Philippine Sea. Beijing's foreign ministry saying that the equipment its Coast Guard use does not inflict damage and even called it a green light pointer supposedly used for measuring distance. This contradicts PCG's claim that it was a military-grade laser which caused temporary blindness to the Filipino crew. Let's go straight to the source of the story, former Philippine envoy to the United States, Cuisia Jr. Ambassador, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Menchu, to you and to your televiewers.
Sir, the United States, among many other nations, is standing with the Philippines after the laser pointing incident. And China then accused the U.S. of using the Mutual Defense Treaty to intimidate Beijing after the U.S. reaffirmed that an armed attack on the Philippine Armed Forces in the West Philippine Sea will invoke its commitments under the defense deal. So now, is the laser incident a clear attack of aggression?
Well, I think you will have to leave it to the experts to determine whether, in fact, it satisfies the conditions for what they would call an armed attack. There are, of course, differing opinions. Former Senior Associate Justice Tony Carpio says it is considered an armed attack. Some of the senators disagree. I think it's best to leave it to the experts to determine whether, in fact, it would be classified as an armed attack.
You mentioned, yes.
But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, sir.
But personally, I don't really think it is an armed attack, but it is a threat. And therefore, we should seriously consider that as a threat, which, of course, increases the tension between China and the Philippines.
Yes, you mentioned earlier retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, and he was urging the Philippine government to clarify this with the U.S. Do you agree?
Yes, I think it's best that they bring it up to the U.S. and determine how serious this action of China was, and perhaps then they can agree on what's the next best step to take, considering that incident. No.
Okay. Well, as we mentioned earlier, the U.S. already said that an armed attack on the Philippine Armed Forces in the West Philippine Sea will invoke its commitments under the defense deal, and a lot of people are saying that under certain conventions, the use of military-grade lasers, which China also was a party to, is a form of an armed attack.
Yes, but I think we all want to avoid this incident becoming a more serious action leading, say, to war. Nobody wants war between China and the U.S. or between China and the Philippines. I think that's clear. So, but however, we should, I think, take steps to prevent the same action being taken again by China, because it is certainly a serious threat to our ECG crew members. No?
Right. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin was now saying that a green light pointer, not a military-grade laser, was used to measure the distance of the Philippine vessel and signal directions to ensure navigation safety. Judging from what you've seen and what you've heard, could that be possible, sir?
Well, I'm sorry to say, I always take the statements of Chinese spokesperson or Chinese ministry officials with a grain of salt, because many times they don't tell us the truth, and I would not rely on their statement. I would rather rely on a third party that looks at it objectively and determines whether, in fact, what they're saying is right or wrong. No.
Well, President Bongbong Marcos summoned Chinese envoy Huang Xilian over the laser pointing incident. As a former envoy, can you explain the gravity of an ambassador being summoned by the chief executive?
Well, that doesn't happen too often, and therefore it should be taken with some seriousness. The Chinese should I think, be concerned, because they claim that they want to be friends with the Philippines. When the president of the Philippines summons the Chinese ambassador, there is some serious reason for doing that, because that's not done usually. In other words, they must be concerned that the president is quite disappointed about the action taken by China, and this is why he is summoning a Chinese ambassador. He's not summoning him to just say hello and exchange social greetings and so on. I think there is a reason for President Marcos calling or summoning the Chinese ambassador.
You mentioned
and I think they should take that seriously.
You mentioned earlier this doesn't happen often. Based on, if you can recall, when has this happened before?
Well, not too often. If you look at the last, let's say, during these 6 years of the Duterte administration, I don't think he ever summoned any of the ambassadors to the palace, as far as I can recall. And of course, since President Marcos took over, I think this is the first time that he has summoned a foreign ambassador to the palace.
We spoke with former National Security Advisor Clarita Carlos yesterday, and she said that she has suggested lowering diplomatic ties with China and be more forceful. What do you think of that strategy?
Well, that's of course one option, but I think that should be weighed very carefully, because there will be implications particularly with regard to our economy, China being our major trading partner. So that has to be weighed very carefully. But I think it's appropriate for the Philippines to raise this as a serious concern, because, as you know, they have been ignoring all the diplomatic protests that we have, that the DFA has filed. I think, if I recall correctly, since President Marcos took over, there's been, 75?
That's correct.
Protests that have been filed. If we look back to the Aquino administration, the Duterte administration, and the current Marcos administration, hundreds and hundreds of protests have been filed by DFA, which have been completely ignored by the Chinese authorities.
So it seems like the diplomatic protest route has become, it's not very effective. So what do you think it will take to be able to stop China's aggression in the West Philippine Sea?
Well, what we have been suggesting in the past, which the Duterte administration refused to do, was to constantly bring up the issue of the arbitral ruling in every opportunity we have at the United Nations, in General Assemblies, all the meetings where it can be taken up, it should be taken up, to get the whole world to support the Philippine position. But the Duterte administration refused to do that. And it was only towards the end of his term that he actually brought up the arbitral ruling, but he sort of just mentioned it. He didn't make too big a fuss about it. I think we should constantly take this up in the United Nations General Assemblies and every opportunity we've had. That is what Nicaragua did in the case of their case against the U.S., where they won in the arbitral tribunal, but the U.S. also refused until finally, after about 10 years, the U.S. decided to settle the case with they did not, of course, admit that they were mistaken, but they settled peacefully with Nicaragua.
All right. Well,
so I think we have other options to take.
all right. We'll be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Menchu Macapagal. Our source today, former Philippine envoy to the United States, Jose Cuisia Jr. Sir, the Defense Departments of the U.S. and the Philippines during the trip of Secretary Lloyd Austin announced the two nations have agreed to restart the joint maritime patrols in the South China Sea. How necessary is this action following the laser incident?
Well, it's even more critical that they precisely resume these joint patrols to prevent another incident like that. And I'm very glad that the Marcos administration has decided to resume the joint U.S.-Philippine patrols, because during the Duterte administration, this was suspended and they never resumed it again. I think it's a very good idea, and we should even push the suggestion of Japan, Philippines, U.S., and possibly even Australia working together on joint patrols, because that will serve as a deterrence to the Chinese aggression.
And how soon should we start the joint patrols, sir?
Well, as soon as possible, because as I said, we suggested these during the Aquino administration. At that time, the U.S. was not yet decided, or they had not yet agreed, but eventually they did, and it started during the Duterte administration, but it was suspended shortly thereafter. And so I'm glad that they resume this, and I think they should do it as soon as possible.
How can the Philippines benefit from this defense cooperation? Do you really think it could stop the Chinese activity in the West Philippine Sea?
Well, certainly it will benefit the Philippines because, one, they will contribute to the enhancement of the capability of our armed forces. The presence of the U.S. In the West Philippine Sea in the form of joint patrols will, of course, serve as a deterrence to the Chinese aggressors. And I think it will also bolster the morale of our armed forces with the U.S. Working together with them.
Well, it's been mentioned that the Philippines and the U.S. have agreed to expand American military presence, giving troops access to 4 new sites in the country. So we have Zambales, Cagayan, Isabela, and Palawan, all of which face China, Taiwan, and the Korean Peninsula. These were the sites which were earlier proposed as the new EDCA sites. But the final 4 sites have yet to be revealed. Where are the best places to set up these sites?
Well, there are actually 5 that have been agreed, and then 4 additional.
Yes.
The 4 additional have not been identified. I think that's also being jointly studied by both the U.S. And the Philippine military, because they have to determine on, well, what are the requirements from both sides, no? And I don't think Secretary of Defense Carlito Galvez was ready to indicate which 4 areas they're considering, no?
Well, President Bongbong Marcos and his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden, are eyed to meet in April in Washington. What should their meeting focus on?
Well, I think one of the things precisely to talk about also what exactly can the U.S. do to strengthen the capability of the armed forces, particularly the Philippine Navy? Because the ships that we got from the U.S., we got three of the decommissioned cutters. They're now among the largest warships in our Navy. But these are 45-year-old ships. We need much newer ships, and we need more modern ships. So that's one area. Of course, the Air Force, the same thing. We have very old planes, and at one time we were actually talking about getting F-16s from the U.S. However, it was the Philippine Air Force that decided not to push through with it because they were concerned about the maintenance cost of the F-16s. But I think we really need to strengthen the capability of our Air Force. And I hope that's going to be one of the items that will be discussed when President Marcos meets with President Biden.
All right, thank you very much, former Philippine envoy to the United States, Jose Cuisia Jr. We'll be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned.